Thanks, Melinda. Thanks, everybody. The economics and the politics of productivity, in a sense, I want to come back to where Saul started and where John finished. Because there is, if you like, a big gap between those two. On the economics, I would make an essential point that if you think of those levers that we would like to move, and every speaker has mentioned some of them, there is a surprising amount of agreement on what we should do. I really don't think the problem of this room or this nation is the economics. You know, we kind of know what to do. What we aren't good at doing, and arguably are increasingly worse at doing, is achieving that. How do we switch from A to B? I'm going to make that point by starting with the economics. And in a simple sense, you know, that's 2,000 years of recorded economic history. It shows that shares of global income are dominated by productivity. You have an industrial revolution and a small share of the world's population could carve out a massive hunk of the global pie. But we happen to live in that blink of an eye of human history in which the likes of China and India are having their industrial revolution. And that is magnificent. In a number of ways, that has thrown prosperity at 24 million people living on a continent. We have a bunch of options because of that. In particular, if I could call it the China boom, the resources boom, whatever you want to term it. That's been absolutely magnificent for us. But I would suggest that there are three things to take account of that arguably say, you know, taken together, they say the need for reform has lifted, because I think that the pressure on living standards that Peter mentioned in his introductory comments, there are some risks that that's not going away. One of those is because China's magnificent success has partly come at the expense of borrowing some growth from the future. You look at business investment spending as a share of 170 different economies around the world. That is China over on the right-hand side. That's Chad on the left. Never go to Chad. China's built too much for its level of income. And what it has built, it has increasingly relied too much on debt to build. And right now, China happens to be reinvesting in its old economies, and that's showing up in marvellous things like coke and coal prices and the iron ore price. But do not underestimate this. Right? This transition has only just begun, and arguably will take the better part of a decade. And as that continues to happen, and will have to happen, that will throw up a series of challenges for Australia. We've already seen them for a while. They are the largest single reason why the living standards, so per head, inflation adjusted, in Australia have struggled for some years now. China's slowdown and a start of an economic transition are extremely important. This has not finished. Second thought, a transition that we haven't even yet begun, so is, and yes, when they write the history of the last decade and more, the economists chapter 1 will be the rise of China and emerging economies, but chapter 2 will be a global financial crisis. And one of the side effects of the global financial crisis is that central banks, when governments vacated the field and left the repair of the damaged economies to central banks, you saw a remarkable fall in interest rates. Now, just at a very simple level, there is a reason why when economies are strong, typically interest rates are high. Strong economies, inflation risks as you hit capacity. There are reasons why when economies are weak, you have low interest rates, right? You get the economy moving again. In Australia and around the world, economies are okay, but interest rates are the lowest that we've ever seen. I don't have time to get into the economics and increasingly the politics of that. But again, that's not permanent. There are structural reasons to think that interest rates won't quite return to the average of the past, but they'll certainly eventually be substantially higher than today. China's transition is ongoing, will be a challenge. This new challenge will eventually be a problem for Australia as well. And the well-known one around an ageing population and the impact of that, the underlying share of workers or potential workers versus total population. What that says to me is something that's pretty simple, but is an important backdrop for this work that the Productivity Commission is doing. And indeed, the work that arguably everybody in this room, one way or another, is doing. All of us in life have a second job: to leave the world a better place. And all of us, in our own ways, are fighting that fight. And that fight is arguably harder. I would say, the simple summary is that living standards in Australia are already pressured and that those pressures won't go away. China's transition will need to continue. Interest rates at some stage will need to rise, and Australians are households much more than governments, but Australians are heavily indebted by global standards, and ageing will have an impact. The need for a boost to our prosperity from our productivity, from moving the levers. It might be the cities reform, it might be the competition reform, it might be federal state reform, it might be taxation reform, it may be a range of other things that you get to talk about this afternoon. But I want to make a point. This challenge, we now need more than ever to rise to it. And just as the demand for reform and its good effects has risen, the supply of good policy actually making it out the other side of our parliaments has fallen away. Or to come back to my opening point, we mostly know what to do, but we're not actually doing it. Now, there are some reasons for that. If you've had stagnant or for chunks of time in recent years falling living standards, politics is harder. It's not that across the last 10 or 15 years we went from Canberra being run by geniuses to Canberra being run by idiots. Right? When the pie is not growing, and you need some growth to grease the wheels of change. And when that growth in living standards is not happening, it becomes a lot harder to not merely to govern, but particularly to improve the governance, if you like. Second, and that old point that we've done a bunch of stuff already. Australia is arguably the most successful advanced nation in the world over the last third of a century. Partly luck, 24 million people on a vast continent, but partly because we genuinely did a bunch of good things. But you can only float the dollar once. There are a whole bunch of things that we have already done. Well, there's still a big list of things we can do, but it is true that a bunch are already done. That third point that I want to bring home strongly to, so why? Why are our political systems failing to generate these new reforms that we know? There's stuff that could be done, and yes, those first two reasons are important. But the third, to me, is arguably the key, and I think economists may not have thought of this much, but I think we'll understand it. Competition, well, as Ian noted, is mostly great, but occasionally tricky. Across a long period of time, and you saw those charts just at the end there from John, across a long period of time, the competition for votes in Australia has become much more intense, at least in part because, we used to grow up, it was Holden or Ford, it was, this football team, or that football team. We were rusted on it was this political party or that, we always vote this way. As we've become increasingly distrustful of politics and politicians and frustrated with them, we are increasingly willing to change our vote. And as that market for votes has become more competitive, the behaviour of the participants in the market for votes has become increasingly bad. I find this really quite frustrating, and as a simple rule of thumb, I guess I would say that now for 20 years, each successive opposition in Australia has tended to become more willing to be populist, to take the cheap shot. Why? Because it works. It really does. You can succeed. I would say that it's getting easier and easier to become Prime Minister and harder to then do something with it. And that change in the market for votes, and hence the participant, those firms, the Labor, Liberal, National, the people selling into those markets, their behaviour is a problem for us. What can we do? Well, I don't know. What I would say is that this is diabolically hard, and there will be perhaps many among you, and maybe particularly the economists among you, who will have the view that, all right, in the next recession we'll get our act together, because we've done it before. And I'm afraid I'm quite strongly of the view that these structural changes, particularly around the behaviour of political parties, is such that when the next recession hits, we will still be, Bart and Homer, we will still have our fingers wrapped around the throat of each other and be strangling away. For all the recognition of the economics, there are sensible things to do. I have little confidence that even in a changed set of circumstances of a recession that we're going to lift our act. Having said that, there are some things. I've quoted at the top of that slide the economist Michael Jackson, at least admitting that people like me and others you've heard from today, the temptation for us is always to insist on perfection, which in my case is simply defined as everybody's got to realise I'm right. And any other policy suggestion on tax reform, superannuation, aged care, federal, state, anything that deviates ever so slightly from mine is the product of idiots. That's true. It's true to me, and I've got to get over it. I've got to, so partly whether it's the individual organisation, and it may be a productivity commission, it may be Deloitte Access Economics, it may be whoever else. We've got to admit that there's going to be room for compromise. We actually agree on lots, and media, part of the story too. 20 years ago, 1998, John Howard comes out of hospital and there's the thought, well, we might have a GST. And I spent 20 minutes doing a pre-recorded TV interview on the pros and cons of the GST. When it was shown that night, it was probably about 3 minutes, and it turned out the GST only had cons. News is the argument, if you like. But whether it's me insisting on my way or the highway, or how we portray this, I think Mr. and Mrs. Suburbs think there's much more disagreement among experts than there actually is. We agree on a lot, and we should be more like Bernie Fraser and less like John Stone, who I dearly love, but again, wanted that perfection all the time and accepted nothing less, whereas Bernie was willing to admit that, and you take superannuation. I didn't love the reforms that have gone through, but they're better than what we had, and this stuff is important. Last of all, the weapons of mass destruction of the Australian political landscape. What is killing the ability of each of us around our second job to leave the world, to leave Australia a better place, is oppositions. Now, to be clear, this is both sides. I'm not saying one side more than the other. They are responding to incentives, but we should not let them do it. We shouldn't let them say no to all these things during a parliamentary term and then at 5 minutes to midnight ahead of the election say, well, yes, and we'll take those, so, you know, all that stuff. We need to hold all political participants to a higher standard because until we do, we're not going to get the better Australia that we deserve. Thank you very much.